This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Hi, everybody. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. It is Christmas Eve as I am piecing this recording session together. I am breaking it up into multiple parts because, I already know it's going to be longer than the normal podcast length. But it is a special time in the year as we close out 2023 in wrestling. It is the FSWR channel, and we are here for our special year in review recap. I'm trying to glamour it up more than it'll probably end up being. But I always like to do these at the tail end of the year to reflect back on wrestling in the year and talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, pretty much all the products we watched. And it seems like every year the pool of discussion gets smaller and smaller. You know, we used to have like 3 or 4 modern wrestling shows we were talking about in a given week. Remember the good old days when we had WWE, NWA, AEW, MLW. I think I was talking about Impact at one point on the channel. Now that was passion. When I could muster up the ability to watch Impact Wrestling. Actually, I don't think I was watching the TV shows. I might have done a pay-per-view recap or two, but yeah. What is that list whittled down to? WWE? Pretty much that. 1.5 products. If you want to throw in AEW for a little bit of discussion there too. But I am looking forward to this one. Gotten a bit of a break over the last few days. You know, had some time to recuperate and prepare for this one. So I'm revived. My energy levels are through the roof. And I want to take a minute to just say, you know, if you're watching the channel for the first time, I always like to do these little intros here for any stragglers or new eyeballs that happen to come across the video. Make sure you comment, subscribe, like the show. I am also on YouTube and Rumble every Monday and Friday for new content and new material. That is discounting the 1 week in the year where I take off for personal reasons. That was a bit of a oddball, me not doing a Friday or a Monday podcast this week, but I just needed the break, you know. A lot of holiday busyness comes up for me this time of year, and I just don't have a lot of downtime like I normally do. But just to give you a rundown for what we're going to do on this particular podcast, we'll be sort of breaking things down into a few categories. The big one is the match of the year list, which I promised a while ago, and I'll share that in the final segment of the show. But there are other few things I want to address here. We're kind of reflecting back on wrestling in 2023. You know, just some general news and general talking points that I think are worth addressing. If you follow me on the channel for a few years now, you know that the AEW reviews were an established piece of the Friday podcast for the longest time. It was a staple in many ways. You know, where every Friday I would come on here, I would rant about how horrible Dynamite was for the most part. You know, have a good laugh at all the bad stuff, and then I would sort of move on with the classic review series portion of the show, and that would be it. And somewhere along the way, long story short, My passion and the drive to rant about AEW became more difficult to bear. And around the late summer, early fall of this year, it was shortly after the All In pay-per-view in Wembley, and that's kind of when I had my come to Jesus moment. And I realized the show's not getting any better. It's becoming increasingly more difficult to watch every week. The things that I once valued on that TV show are becoming more gradually reduced. You know, the backstage drama and behind the scenes stuff ended up taking precedent over a lot of things we were actually seeing on the weekly shows. The MJF booking was becoming more and more insufferable. You know, FTR was back to being an undervalued, underappreciated tag team. I had some lingering hope that the stuff with Punk was going to work out and get resolved. You know, once we heard about the altercation at Wembley with him, Jungle Jagoff, and Tony Khan. You know, but once Punk got canned and Tony did that completely asinine, I was scared for my life monologue, you know, reading into the teleprompter and announcing that Punk was terminated from the company in frickin' Chicago of all places. You know, that was where I just kind of had to put my foot down and say, enough's enough. I can't do this anymore. You know, this guy just clearly doesn't get it. He's got his head so far up the elite's anal cavities. There was no way of convincing him to see it any other way. And, you know, the Punk firing was the nail in the coffin, but, you know, the red flags along the way were becoming more prevalent as the weeks and months went on. And look, I'm not about to sit here and do a play-by-play breakdown of every AEW problem from January until now. And Christ, this podcast would go on for another 8 hours if I tried that. I think in its simplest terms, here's how I can analyze the current state of AEW, where I stand with things as of 2023. We were promised sports-based wrestling. We were promised a viable alternative to WWE. From the very beginning, AEW's message was, we're counterculture. We're different from the evil empire up north. We do things differently. You know, while AEW was never going to appeal to me in every single business facet, even if, okay, let's say mathematically speaking, 80% of the show was always going to irritate the crap out of me, at least you would have that 20% weekly where I could lose myself in one or two good storylines, you know, with guys like MJF and guys like Punk, guys like FTR, talents that had proven to be valuable commodities to the company since day one, and they were doing things that WWE would never do. You know, for a period of time, you could throw Bryan Danielson into that conversation too. I always talk about it. The best period for me viewing AEW, All In 2021, the signing of Bryan Danielson, you know, before they totally screwed the pooch with him, signing Adam Cole. You had CM Punk in there as a top babyface. MJF was the top heel. FTR was an integral part of the weekly show. I had stuff I could sink my teeth into. You know, even with Punk out with that injury and the whole suspension deal after the whole all-out fight with the Beta Bucks, you know, at least I could still hang my hat knowing that he would eventually come back. And when AEW kickstarted Collision over the summer, it reinvigorated my interest a little bit. I was kind of getting burnt out on Dynamite. There was a sense of hope that came back for fans like me that hated what I was seeing a lot of the time on those Wednesday programs. It just became too infested with the comedy stuff and the indie outlaw booking that kept turning me off on the product to begin with. You know, and then we saw what happened after the Wembley fiasco. Punk gets fired. You know, Collision basically goes to hell in a handbasket almost immediately. Dynamite is still Dynamite. You know, Rampage is still Rampage. Trying to understand it from my vantage point, I think I just have to generalize the question this way. What's the appeal for me as a wrestling fan to want to watch AEW in 2023, much less 2024? Who has AEW developed or built in the last year that would give me a rhyme or reason to want to watch every week? They've completely soured me on MJF. The whole babyface turn, making him the polar opposite of what got him over with everybody in the first place. Well, now he's just coasting along for the ride. All the guys that were heavily featured on Collision at one point in those top roles, Jay and Juice, FTR, Ricky Starks, the Gun Boys, the Acclaimed. The hell has Tony done to help those guys in the last 12 months? Yeah, Jay White, I guess, is still an integral part of the G1 thing they're doing right now, but Juice? He's back to being a background player. FTR have never been any more irrelevant. Ricky Starks is wasting his time teaming with the black hole of charisma that's Big Cass. The Guns in the Acclaim. Honestly, you don't hear much about those guys at this stage in the game. I mean, we could run down the entire AEW roster if we wanted to, but, again, I'm not trying to make this a 3-day podcast. I'm just memorized with how much regression there's been with this product in the last year. Their flagship show is barely cracking 800,000 viewers most weeks. Rampage is pretty much non-existent. Collision's doing average, somewhere around 400,000 viewers right now, which is down significantly from when Punk was booked on the show. The audiences are becoming more and more stagnant. The growth periods are completely stunted because they're just appealing to the same market at this point. I mean, the current viewers they have, they're the same people that are going to watch no matter how good or bad the product is. But the audience retention is the most baffling thing to me. I hear about it, dude. I read the reports. I listen to Cornette's podcast. They cannot keep their audience to save their lives. If they're lucky to start with 900,000 people most weeks, there's usually a dropout rate somewhere around 100, 150,000 viewers by the end. That's not good. And again, watch the show. What is the incentive for people to stay glued for an entire 2-hour period? For a bunch of meaningless tournament matches that have no inbuilt storylines? To see MJF bounce around and feud with 9 different people? Now, I'm all for layered storylines in wrestling, but God almighty, dude. You ever hear about overexposure? And nothing's complete. The whole thing's being done because Tony's desperate to keep viewership. He knows MJF's a big draw. So now he's just spamming him all over the TV show just to keep eyeballs glued. And then on top of that, you got this devil storyline they're doing right now that's evidently going to have a disappointing payoff. Just because of how much speculation's gone into who it's going to be. God, at the rate they're going, it'll be 2026 by the time they pay it off. And by then, who cares? I don't know anybody that cares right now outside the marks. I'm at the point now where I'm just trying to rationalize in my head. Even if I wanted to give AEW a second chance in 2024, why? Who's left? Punk's gone. MJF's been mostly ruined. And the jury's still out on whether or not he's going to re-sign when his contract comes due. Who's going to replace those two? Who's going to be their next top star that fills the shoes of the stellar work Punk and Max have done for that godforsaken company in the past 3 years? Who's on their level? Will Ospreay? AEW's newest big signee? That's now just become another dude on the roster like everybody else? Ricky Starks? Yeah, they dropped the ball on that guy big time. You remember when he and MJF were cooking up with that feud at the beginning of the year? And then Tony just dropped it because he's a moron and has no idea what he's doing? How much money could they made off of that program? Instead of doing a one-and-done blow-off match. I like Samoa Joe. But realistically, how much gas does he have left in the tank at this point? And Adam Cole, I don't ever want to see that guy in a ring again, much less walk. And God, considering they would book him as a top heel at some point if he ends up being revealed as the devil and turns on Max. Again, it's just, who cares at this point? Who else is there? Kenny Omega's about one step away from ending up in an iron lung. I heard he's back on the injured reserve list again. Who else you got? Swerve Strickland? The guy that just sat there and voluntarily dumped a gallon of blood down Adam Page's throat? Yeah, how about no? Fuck that guy. It's a disaster area. It's a continual cycle of nothing but negative publicity for this company. And you know what's really scary? We're at the point now where even the most diehard AEW loyalists are finally waking up. They're seeing the writing on the wall. They know what's up. I really do think 2024 is going to be the tipping point. Because if the rumors are true that Warner Brothers is interested in picking up Raw for a new media rights deal, which would basically off AEW from that network once their contract terms come due, if Warner decides that AEW's declining product isn't worth the financial investment in the long term, that basically leaves Tony out to dry. What happens to his product? What happens to Dynamite, Collision, Rampage? What major network is going to want to jump aboard that sinking ship? The last thing Tony needs is for his weekly programming to be saddled on a streaming service. I know cable television's a dying market in and of itself, but you're still going to have a broader reach with cable than you are streaming platforms. At least with where we are in 2023. Maybe in the year 2043, that'll be an entirely different conversation, but we're not there yet. You still need to reach new audiences. And that's going to be problematic if you try to reduce everything down to a streaming service where it's all subscription-based. I think HBO Max was the platform that Tony was interested in moving his product to, but again, here's the issue. Okay, say they lose the Warner Brothers deal, and they have to rely on Max as their primary source of presenting the weekly episodic shows. Who's watching? The 800,000 people that are already subscribed to Max? Or would willingly do it because Tony has that built-in market? The core audience, if you will? Okay, well, what about other people? How do you market to them? How do you advertise? How do you generate new fans? And see, that's the problem with AEW right now. They're complacent. They're not growing their audience. And they're not necessarily losing people at the same stage, but it's just the same niche audience every week that's watching the shows. Give or take a few thousand, depending on whether or not sports is playing in as a factor. But these are things Tony needs to be cognizant of. Because this TV rights deal is coming due in the next year. It's one thing to go full board with the streaming platform, but at that point, you're basically conceding defeat in recognizing that your company isn't profitable. The thing is, when it comes to WWE, the conversations are mutually exclusive. They're making money hand over fist. There have been a lot of corporate changes in just the last 6 or 7 months. The UFC TKO merger, Vince being dropped down in the pecking order, Triple H coming back and serving as the head of creative, Nick Khan basically overseeing Vince's previous role. There's been a lot of turnover. It's a tough position for Tony Khan to be in right now as we move into the new year. And people have been saying for the longest time that AEW's been ice cold as a product. Company morale is generally not good. You'll have the people in the business that lie and say everything's better off without Punk there, but we all know they're full of shit. Look at the show. Show sucks. We can throw out all these possible conversations about what'll be the main cause of AEW's downfall. But the Warner Brothers dilemma, it's extremely important to Tony's overall bottom line. If he loses that TV deal and AEW continue to spend more money than they're accumulating on average from year to year, what does that leave Tony with? Aside from Pete in hand. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the dust settles with the whole WBD discussion. The idea that they're even putting out feelers for WWE, that should tell you something. That the company executives have already held meetings. They're negotiating. Doesn't mean it's going to go anywhere, but just the fact that there's interest between both parties, that's a huge warning sign. And, there's so much more detail I could go into, but before I move on to the match list here, let me just put some of the AEW talk to closure. WWE has had good and bad on their programming throughout the year. The Bloodline was sort of the A category material. Let's be frank. Everything else he kind of saw was just there to fill the void. With that said, the Bloodline was enough to generate interest in the product. Not just for me, but for a lot of people watching. What did AEW have in 2023 from a feud or storyline standpoint that would make you think this is a reason to go back and watch some of the TV shows from earlier in the year? I'm not talking about individual matches or angles. I'm talking about long-term start-to-finish booking or storylines that made sense, gave you reasons to come back and watch the show every week, and didn't leave you disappointed when it was over. What were those feuds? CM Punk? Well, he was around for what? A couple of months before he got kicked to the curb? Yeah, he was involved with stuff during that period. But how much of it really mattered at the end of the day? How much of it was left unfinished? The things they could have done with him, claiming to be the real world's champion, wrapping up the program with MJF, doing the rubber match that people were craving to see for over a year. Well, that didn't happen. MJF went from their hottest heel to an emotional, crying, simping, moronic babyface. Spent the majority of the summer doing horrible comedy sketches with his buddies. That all sucked. I like MJF. He's a talented guy. But what the hell? That's not the MJF character that I liked. It's not the one that I was sold on from the very beginning. There were incremental periods of promise with the company where things looked like they were shaping up to be great. And we already talked about Collision, and I'll have a few of those matches on my list run down, but that entire show, dude, the definition of what could have been. And it's not to say I'll never consider rewatching AEW again, but there's got to be an incentive. There's got to be a selling point. And they've neutered just about every possible thing that I could like or enjoy. Go back and listen to the recaps, dude. How many good things did I talk about with AEW? I said, they have potential here. They can make this work. If they just stick the course with it and don't screw it up. This could be their feud of the year. This could be their match of the year. This could be whatever. All these missed opportunities. Because Tony just can't help himself. And I'm not really following the whole PWI Insider, Wrestling Observer, End of the Year awards or whatever. I don't even know if they've been out by now. Does anybody know if Tony Khan won Booker of the Year again? At this stage, it's just laughable. Seriously? At some point, people have got to wake up to the reality. Tony Khan is not a good booker. He can maybe pass as a good promoter. But a booker? an on-screen character? No. No, somebody that books competent weekly episodic television that gives you reasons to come back and watch, absolutely out of the question. Tony Khan has failed that on many accounts, and I will stand by that until the day this company goes in the grave. So at this stage, until I see some major turnaround in the booking department, God forbid Tony hires somebody to come in and write the show for him. But we all know that's not going to happen because that's not how he operates. He's a one-man working crew. He refuses to budget his time. He refuses to let anybody oversee or take control. But you know what the problem is? As long as he has say in what goes, these problems will persist. And it's going to be the same talking point over and over and over again. So again, until I see that turnaround, I'm going to hedge my bets and say 2024 will be a lot like this past year. A lot of unanswered questions and heartbreaking disappointment. Sorry if that's not in the Christmas spirit. But I'll tell you what will be. This match of the year list I'm about to run down. Now, before I get into the actual list, let me forewarn you about a few things first. These are all completely subjective takes. In no way am I basing this off any star rating system. I didn't compare these matches to the PWI list or anything. When I do my year in review match of the year list, it's all based on my opinion. Some of these you may agree with, others not so much. So as we run everything down here, keep in mind that I'm sharing my personal list of top 15 matches. And we're going to start this countdown with an oddball. As soon as you read the graphic here, the first thing you're going to say is, wait a minute, Tommy. You said you don't watch Raw. So why is this on your top 15? Well, the answer is quite simple. The smart-ass answer is I was desperate to come up with 15 matches that I thought were worthy of making my match of the year list. So I had to cherry pick some stuff at the last minute. But no, the actual answer is, I'd heard people raving about how great this was back in September. I remember I jotted it down as a temporary placeholder for me to go watch because I was genuinely curious. Normally, I'm not one to concur with the collective opinion. But in this case, I wholeheartedly agree. For the people that were saying this was one of the best TV matches in WWE all year, I surely won't dispute that notion after having watched it. Gunther versus Chad Gable for the Intercontinental Championship on the September 4th edition of Raw. Now, I believe this actually came after they had wrestled a couple times previously in non-title matches. This one just happened to be for the belt. And, there's a lot I can go into when trying to constitute what, to me, makes a great professional wrestling match. Beyond all the psychological aspects and the emotional drama that goes into the layout, for me, someone who's an older school fan with an older school mindset, the thing that I'm always looking for in my wrestling is serious, button-down, no-nonsense stuff. To where when it's over, the first thing on my mind is, damn, I want to watch that again. And the thing that makes a match like this truly special is that I don't watch Raw. I was not following the backstory of the Gunther-Chad Gable feud. But what made this work was the pure raw emotion that went into everything these guys were doing in the ring. It was a hard-hitting fight between two serious workers. I knew who the babyface was. I knew who the heel was. You had Chad Gable's family at ringside supporting him. For the first time in God knows how long, it looked like WWE actually putting forth an effort to present Chad Gable as something more than just a lame duck comedy character. And it wasn't shooshing the people. He wasn't doing bad, hokey comedy sketches with Otis. He was just being himself. He was being the old American Alpha version of Chad Gable. The guy that got monstrously over by just doing what he always does best. Fucking wrestling. It's not that hard. And you put him in there with a talent like Gunther. I mean, we all know how great that guy is. I mean, trust me, he's going to be on this list more times than one. This is everything I could possibly want out of a match in 2023. No stupid comedy angles. Nobody's winking at the camera. No one's going into business for themselves and exposing how fake everything is. It's two serious athletes having a competitive match for a championship belt with a hot crowd. You know, what more can you ask for as a fan? No one was drinking the other guy's blood. No one was shoving forks into the other guy's eye socket. It was grassroots professional wrestling. And again, even though I don't watch Raw, I still understood everything that was happening here. I knew who the good guy was, who the bad guy was. I knew what was at stake, why I should care to see one guy win and the other lose. When you had those great camera shots of Gable's daughters at ringside, devastated when Gunther pinned Gable and retained the belt at the end, you know, those are the kinds of moments that matter in professional wrestling. The moments where you realize, you know, even though kayfabe's dead, you can still suspend your disbelief for moments like that. It was such an awesome match, and I'm glad I made time to go check it out to see how great it was after hearing people praise it. This is a rare gem that the marks actually got right. They said you need to go out of your way to watch it. It's that good. And I agree. They were correct. They didn't stiff me. And then by that same token, you get matches like this, where the match is filled with such ungodly horror that it exceeds being bad and becomes remarkably great by comparison. So I guess I'm being a little hypocritical in what I just said about loving super serious wrestling. But I had to throw this on the list just to amuse myself. If you did not watch this coffin match with Sting and Darby versus Christian and Swerve from All Out, it's one of the last AEW reviews I ever did on the channel before I pulled the plug on AEW and said, all right, this shit sucks. I'm done. This wasn't the straw that broke the camel's back or anything. But I remember having a revelation when watching this for the first time, where it's just train wreck level terrible, and I was laughing uproariously seeing it live. At one point in this match, I just remember saying, what the hell am I doing with my life right now? This was the match between the thumbtack jacket spot with Sting, where he was hitting stinger splashes in the corner but not actually making contact with the heels using the jacket. Like Darby kicking the heels' asses 2-on-1 while he had his hands tied behind his back. Sting shoot breaking a table by throwing all his body weight down on Swerve after it didn't break the first time. And the classic shot of stuffing Swerve in the casket with his fucking dreadlocks still hanging out of the top of it. God. This was so epically horrible, but so fucking amazing at the same time. Actually, you know what it was? It was AEW in a nutshell, dude. This match. You know, when people say, show me a clip of AEW so I can get a taste of what to expect, this is the first thing I would show them. I still laugh when I go back and see it again. I still have All In saved on my DVR for this exact reason. Because I knew I was going to go back and rewatch this match again at the end of the year. I'm glad I saved it, because I needed a good laugh. And this one brought me tears of joy. Every stupid possible thing you would ever expect out of AEW, it was all here. And that's why I love it. so I can pick apart the Bush League presentation of what AEW is and has always been. This holds a special place in my heart. But I guess that's kind of the appeal with AEW in a lot of ways, isn't it? Because in so many instances, AEW can pretty much be summed up with that coffin match, where it's just all hands on deck, free for all, everyone do whatever the fuck you want mentality. And then you get those occasional moments like what we had with Mark Briscoe and Jay Lethal from back in January. And of course, you look at that on paper and you don't have context to it. You think, okay, well, what's so special about it? Yeah, Jay Lethal and Mark Briscoe are great workers. They've been booked like shit because Tony has no idea what he's doing. But it's just a match, right? No. When you factor in that it was the Jay Briscoe tribute match, kind of paints the whole thing in a different light, doesn't it? I'll come back to the conversation about Mark and Jay's booking in a while, but let's talk about the meat of the matter when it comes to this match. I already knew it was going to make my top 15 as early as January of this year. I mean, there was just no way anything could roll it out. The timing of it, the circumstances surrounding the match. This was, kind of going back to the kayfabe thing I was joshing about a minute ago. This was one of those atypical moments in wrestling where everybody watching could kind of dispatch with kayfabe altogether. Because it's non-existent in a situation like this. It didn't matter if Lethal was supposed to be a heel. Didn't matter what was going on with the whole comedy faction with him, Jarrett, Sanjay, and the Kali bootleg. All of that gets swept aside for a moment like this. We all know the history between Jay Lethal and the Briscoes going back to Ring of Honor a decade prior. We've seen Lethal wrestle both of these guys 100 million times. They could wrestle each other in their sleep. It was about paying homage to Jay Briscoe and that absolutely horrible tragedy that never should have happened. You come to think of it, an incident that we're coming up on the year anniversary of, just to provide you with a little more context. It was just a horrible moment for every wrestling fan nationwide. And even if you were never the biggest fan of the Briscoes, which I've talked about before, I wasn't. But you have to look at something like this and pay respect to Tony Khan for doing the right thing for business. Keep in mind, before this match was ever signed to television, Tony had to bend over backwards with the network to get approval for it. This was still during the period where TV executives did not want the Briscoes to make any physical appearances on AEW television. You remember the whole drama where they were basically banished to Ring of Honor and could only make TV appearances on ROH-branded events? Because the Turner Network execs were still butthurt about controversial Jay Briscoe tweets? Yeah, this was all during the height of that drama. Then the accident happened, and Tony basically twisted their wrist to get them to let Mark at least be on the show, even though Mark had nothing to do with the original tweets. They wouldn't even let him make appearances on the TV programs. There was a lot of heated drama that went into this, and that's when I knew it was going to be special. Not because the actual work rate was phenomenal. I mean, it was a very good match, technically sound. Both of these guys have had 100 matches better than this before. But again, it goes back to the argument of the work rate not always being the most critical thing about the wrestling business. It's moments like this where you have to reflect back and remember, it's about more than the moves. It's about everything surrounding the match. The meaning, the story, the implication, the personalities, the drama, everything. It was a babyface match, yeah. But in this case, we all knew how much Jay Briscoe meant to Jay Lethal as a personal friend. So he was the perfect opponent for Mark here. The story in the match where Mark kept valiantly attempting to hit the Jay Driller, multiple failed attempts until the very end where he's finally able to hit it and pin Lethal, is the perfect finish. It's hard to go back and watch it again just because you can tell how emotionally choked up Lethal was at various points. During that chop exchange early on, if you freeze frame it at the right time, you can see him clearly crying. God, it had to be such a difficult position to be in. And then, I couldn't imagine what kind of toll that takes on somebody's psyche. It's like, beyond the whole Jay Briscoe thing, the other major tragedy here is everything surrounding what happened to both of these guys after the tribute match. Or in the case of their booking, what didn't happen. And I even remember talking about it at the time, saying that Tony has a very small window of opportunity to capitalize on Mark's momentum while he was super hot. He could have made Mark the biggest babyface in his whole company. Could have put the world title on him. He could have done so much for Mark beyond just making him another guy on the roster. So take a wild guess as to what the fuck happened. And here we are, coming up on almost a full year since the accident. Where's Mark Briscoe? What's he doing in AEW now? From what I've been able to gather, not much. He's doing jobs in that G1-inspired tournament Tony's booking. Is he a top babyface? Is he in top contention for the world title anytime in the next 6 months? Is he anywhere close to being as white hot now as he was, say, 12 months ago? Nope. And meanwhile, you got Jay Lethal, who continues to spin his wheels, is designated underneath job guy number 77. He's the guy you put in there with the top talent, but he's going to lose. So why do you bother caring? I just hate going back and thinking about what could have been versus what actually happened. Tony blew his chance with Mark Briscoe. He had a very rare opportunity to take a real-life situation and make some money off of it. Instead, he stuck to his guns and did whatever it is that Tony's been doing for the last year. Running off viewers and booking more bad television. But I still love this match. Despite my frustrations with the way Tony's handled the aftermath of Mark Briscoe, I still love the fact that he was able to get this match to happen. I think when we look back at truly great AEW moments years from now, this one will still hold up. It still ranks among my all-time favorite AEW moments. Despite all my issues with this company, I can't hate on something like this. It was all done absolutely well. I just wish the circumstances could have been more jubilant. Now, the next two matches, I'm going to kind of throw hand in hand. Not to say one was better than the other necessarily, because they're kind of on the same playing field. These matches, though, I think are more about the nostalgia of what AEW Collision was supposed to be when it was first created. And the fallout to all the Punk stuff with the Elite, everything that led up to them doing the whole Saturday Night Collision program, what was thought to have been the real wrestling show as opposed to the Cucamonga cockfighting happening on the Dynamite programs every Wednesday. There are levels of jesting that go into this, but when it comes to the first two episodes of Collision dating back to June of this year, when you reflect back on the first TV main event they booked for that week, the six-man tag with Punk and FTR versus Joe Juice Robinson and Jay White, you're going to have the contingency of the Elite fanatics to immediately shit on these matches just because of who's involved. It's the whole us versus them mentality of, we're not going to play by your rules, so we're going to create our own. Look, it sucks that we even got to this point to begin with, to where AEW basically had to create its own Saturday show just because the Elite and Punk decided they couldn't work under the same umbrella. And of course, we can only speculate on that whole conversation. Would AEW Collision even exist if Punk and the Elite couldn't work out their issues behind the scenes? Basically forcing the company into a position where they had to do a roster split and then divide up the Punk camp and the Elite camp without officially calling it a brand split. Again, there's so much detail that goes into a conversation like that. But here's the reason it's so frustrating to reflect back on matches like this. These were two prime examples of the pro wrestler's mindset in AEW versus the indie mindset, where you had a handful of guys on the AEW roster that unilaterally agreed, we hate this indie garbage we're being forced to work around on the Wednesday programs. We don't want to be associated with it. We want to do real pro wrestling the right way. We want a real serious alternative wrestling product that doesn't insult the people's intelligence, that actually gives people a reason to come back and watch the program every single week. Real episodic television where things make sense. We have stories that ebb and flow. We have actual baby faces and heels, simple storylines, characters and personalities that the people can get behind. We make sure that the people being spotlighted are being presented and treated like actual stars. And for a relatively short period of time, we had that. Now that Punk is gone, what is Collision? It's basically just a 2-hour extension of Dynamite every Wednesday with half the viewership. And again, look, the goal here isn't for me to just point out how much better things were when Punk was around on a full-time basis. AEW Collision was never the perfect wrestling show. You were always going to have Tony Khan's fingerprints on it in certain areas. That's just the way he operates. But I think I even remember talking about it at the time. It was closer to the kind of wrestling that I was looking for as a fan. The Mid-South type approach where you have a smaller number of guys at the top of the card. You know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. It's easy to follow the storylines. There's continuity. Everything makes sense from week to week. Even if the shows were never the most exciting to watch, they were logical. When Punk was around to provide his input, and he was working with the guys that actually showed some promise, they had something. As you'll see later on my list here, Collision was producing some of the better in-ring product for AEW matches all year. And with a lot of the guys you see in these matches, whether it's Punk, Ricky Starks, Jay and Juice, FTR, the Guns, these were all guys that were heavily interacting together for multiple weeks on Collision. It wasn't like Dynamite where you see somebody pop up once every 3 or 4 weeks and you never hear from them again. They were all present on the show. They were all working together in some form or fashion, be it in promos, matches, angles, all of their storyline stuff tied together. You had Ricky Starks and CM Punk breaking off and do their own thing for a while. Joe and Punk ended up doing a brief little program together. FTR ended up doing a series of matches with Jay and Juice. You had the Guns being prominently featured on a consistent basis. I just think back to this period and remembering this is the last time I recall AEW talent actually being effectively spotlighted, where guys actually looked like and were being presented as big stars. And I think the viewership numbers reflected that. They were never going to reach Dynamite numbers just because of the placement of the show on Saturdays, but you look at the state of it without Punk around anymore. Again, what the hell is Collision at this point? It's a dead-in-the-water 2-hour TV show that nobody cares about. But these two matches right here, they were the perfect model for what AEW Collision could have been. When you actually try to present wrestling in a real serious manner, these were the poster boys for that. What should have been. Now we have Dynamite Light. And the viewership numbers reflect it. But let's get off of AEW for a minute and circle back to WWE. With this banger of a match that I initially did not have high hopes for, and then after seeing it in real time, I was blown away with how good it actually was. When it comes to the three-way with Gunther, Sheamus, and Drew McIntyre from WrestleMania Night 2, I remember talking about it during the build-up to this match on the SmackDown reports and saying, I really don't like the idea of this on paper. I'm not a fan of multi-person matches. They've been overdone and overexposed to death in modern wrestling. You know, we see them so frequently anymore that none of them mean anything. They used to be specialty matches when you would only see them sparingly. Now we see all the major companies dishing them out like free candy. You know, I've been so burnt out on 3-ways and 4-ways and 5-ways and you name the multi-man. I just don't care to see him anymore. And to a certain degree, that's still true. However, this match ended up exceeding my expectations in so many ways, to the point where when it was over, I knew it would still end up being a match worth revisiting at the end of the year. Everything about this match just clicked. Well, let me put a pin on that. Almost everything clicked. The one gripe I always had about it, and still do upon second viewing, the commentary, specifically Titus O'Neil. God love the guy. I've always had a soft spot for Titus in WWE, but this was not the role for him. But in terms of the match, the hoss fight nature of the three guys involved, the fact that it was 3 grown men just beating the dog shit out of each other for like 15 minutes, the fact that the crowd was super into everything they did from start to finish. You know, I think I even remember saying during my WrestleMania recap this year, everybody just looked like they were having so much fun. The commentators were absorbed into the action. The fans were on their feet. The boys were working their asses off. It felt like an actual WrestleMania quality match. The overall environment, it made it special. You know, I can honestly probably count on one hand the amount of 3-ways or 4-ways that I've genuinely enjoyed watching. Like matches that I would voluntarily go out of my way to see again. That's how good they were. On that very small list, you could probably throw Benoit, Hunter, and Shawn from WrestleMania 20 on there. I think, wasn't there a pay-per-view match years ago with Brock, Cena, and who was the other guy? Someone else. Might have been Roman. No, I can't remember. Well, the point is, the list is very minute. But I would definitely throw this on there as a multi-man that I would gladly go back and rewatch any day of the week and never be bored with it. And again, I was not stoked when they announced this match. You know, I think I even remember saying, kind of wish they would have just done Sheamus and Gunther to kind of settle that beef from the Clash at the Castle match they had the previous year. Because that was really damn great too. That was kind of the match that put Sheamus on the map a little bit. Kind of reinvigorated some interest in him. You know, and then they threw McIntyre in there and I kind of scoffed at it. I was like, really? Do they need to muddy it up by throwing another body in there? Well, as it turns out, McIntyre added a layer to this that would have otherwise been missing. It's unfortunate they dropped the ball so badly with Drew in the last year. Because if I'm being honest, this was probably the last thing he was involved with that I genuinely liked. Yeah, they try to dress it up here and there with the heel turn, but to be honest, it really hasn't done a whole lot for me. The match he had with Rollins didn't really click. The War Games match, I mean, he was just kind of a bit player in the whole thing. It looks like they might be continuing the thing with him and Rollins over the title, but because they've introduced Punk into the equation now, they've already teased the program with him and Rollins. If they do end up doing Rollins and McIntyre in a rematch, well, we already know who's going to win. But I don't want to get hung up on the creative side of things. Again, great match. One of the better three-ways I can recall in recent memory. And I'm glad it was able to take place at a WrestleMania because it really added to the value of it. The crowd environment made this work. The backstory, I guess, made sense. Everybody was on their A game here. Just a really awesome match to go back and watch again. And that brings us to number 9 on the list. I debated whether or not I wanted to put it a little higher up, but the competition was pretty tough once I started juggling things around in that top 5 tier. But I still knew this would wind up making the list somewhere. This is the part of the FSWR show where I have to remind the haters out there that constantly listen to me. Yes, I do enjoy women's wrestling from time to time. The problem is I only want to watch it if and when it's good. And with the way modern women's wrestling is presented a lot of the time, let's just call it like it is. They're few and far between. We see a lot of women's wrestling, not a lot of good women's wrestling. But this particular match, Bianca Belair and Io Sky from Backlash in Puerto Rico, kind of like the three-way I just talked about with Gunther, Sheamus, and Drew McIntyre, watching it live when it happened for the first time, I remember thinking to myself when it was over, beyond the fact that it was a really good match and the girls put together a really nice performance, the crowd was outstanding. And there were some interesting timeline details that played into this when I went back and watched it again. Because the show happened earlier in the year, this whole thing predated Io Sky winning Money in the Bank and then cashing in to become the Women's World Champion. At this point, she was kind of just the challenger of the month for Bianca, back when they were still pushing Bianca hard during that long-standing title reign. But you could tell this was one of the matches that opened up the creative team's eyes to where Io was getting monstrous babyface pops. You could tell there was a fan craving to see WWE run with Io as the champion. Even though she didn't end up winning the belt here, and there was that audible groan after Bianca retained, it didn't totally kill the room because the fans still wound up enjoying the match. But I think this was sort of the start of WWE coming to the realization that Io was starting to gain a lot of traction. Looking past the creative booking side of things, what I really liked about this match, going back and seeing it again, it was a professional wrestling match that I could actively enjoy and not get tied up in having to remind myself that it involved the girls. And again, I don't mean for that to come off as misogynistic because I know how that sounds, but by that same token, it was a girls' match that I could eagerly place on the same level as any men's match. It had intensity. It looked like a viable athletic contest. Both girls pretty much worked it like a guys' match. I know people were raving about that Charlotte-Rhea match from WrestleMania. I'd gone back and watched highlights of it again just to see if maybe I was being a little too critical of it. To me, though, I don't think it compares to the level of crowd investment of pure raw fight feel that this one had. When I saw this match earlier in the year, not only was it a match that I definitely knew would make the list for me, man, I'd even go as far as to say it was one of the best modern women's matches I've seen in the last 5 to 10 years. Easily. I've always been a huge advocate of both these girls, going back to their NXT runs. Now, I can't praise Bianca enough for the progress she's made in such a short period in the business. Io's proven time and time again that she's one of the better female athletes WWE has signed in the last decade. This isn't me kowtowing to the women's wrestling fans or trying to inflate the profile of a girls' match for DEI purposes. I'm being very authentic in my judgment here. These two absolutely earned a spot on my top 15 list. Both of their work this year has been very outstanding. I've soured a little bit on the damage control stuff just because I kind of think Io's getting lost in the shuffle during a lot of it. She doesn't seem anywhere near as important now as an on-screen personality as she did, say, 5 or 6 months ago. Bianca, kind of the same deal. Yeah, but again, that's just me kind of getting hung up on the creative side of things, which I know is easy to do when we're several months past this point. Hopefully as we get back into Rumble and Mania season, we see these two in more prominent feuds again. So when it comes to number 8 on my list here, CM Punk versus Samoa Joe from All In at Wembley. I basically had 2 recurring questions happening in my head when I was comprising this list. 1, did I just put this on the list because I actually loved it? Or did I put it on the list just to troll all the Punk haters? And seeing as how symbolic it ended up being after the fact, especially with all the stories that circulated when the match was actually in progress, boy, does it make the story that much sweeter. Now, to be fair, yes, I do enjoy trolling the Punk haters. But even before all that bullshit went down, I remember talking about it during my All In recap, saying this was one of my favorite Punk matches I've seen during his entire AEW run. It's probably a runner-up between that and the dog collar match with MJF in the previous year. That probably is still hands down the best CM Punk match in AEW from a story standpoint. While maybe technically this wasn't the most fluid Punk match from start to finish, I even remember noting that I've seen several Punk Joe matches that were miles better than this one over the years. Obviously, age comes into play when you're talking about the idea of them trying to capture lightning in a bottle from matches they had in Ring of Honor years ago when they were almost 20 years younger. It's going to be hard to reach that level again. But I think back to this, and I had it in the back of my head. This will probably end up being a very important match in the landscape of AEW's history. Boy, howdy was it ever. Not only was it Punk's final match in AEW before the abrupt send-off, I think back to a comment I made during the match when I watched it for the first time. And it's one of those things where now you think back and you're like, okay, well, now I see why I came to that conclusion, where it looked like Punk was out there just totally phoning it in, saying, I don't give a fuck anymore. I'm just going to make this the most simple, grassroots, old-school pro wrestling match I possibly can. Fuck all the moves marks. Lo and behold, it wound up being one of the best matches on the entire card, if not the single best. Now, again, I get that's a subjective proclamation. But seriously, if you don't believe me, go back and see it for yourself, man. Tell me that wasn't CM Punk going out there with a chip on his shoulder. He said, I'm going to piece together the most basic match I possibly can. I'm not going to kill myself for this stupid fucking company anymore. Probably going to get fired anyway because of all the garbage that happened moments before I just walked out from behind the curtain. So fuck it. I'm going to go through the motions. I'm going to get my paycheck. But I'm still going to put on the performance of a lifetime. The moment Punk broke out the Cena homage with the 5 moves of doom, and then they did the Hulk up spot a few minutes later, crowd went ballistic for it. But that's when I knew, yeah, this dude totally doesn't care anymore. And again, we all know the backstory with the Jungle Boy thing. the whole broken glass spot in the pre-show that he had with Hook. I'm not going to get too in the weeds with that discussion because it's been beaten to death. But man, it just sucks how all this went down. You see Punk go out there for his final AEW match. We didn't really know it at the time. But he looks like he totally gave up trying. He just had his breakthrough moment where he said, I gave these people all I could. I tried to offer my knowledge to the open-minded men and women on this roster that actually value their careers, the ones that want to make something of themselves. I wasn't going to go along with the indie mentality. I wasn't going to make friends with the Cucamonga clan. And now that I know where Tony stands in the fallout to the whole backstage shoving match, whatever in the fuck actually happened during that whole escapade, we still don't know. Probably never will. It's all confidential at this point. But that was all Punk needed. Once he knew Tony wasn't going to take his side, the only thing Punk could do was fulfill the remainder of his contractual obligations, do business the right way by beating Samoa Joe clean in his final AEW match. Doing business the Hulk Hogan way, brother. And now he's in WWE making a boatload of money. And about 10 times happier. So everybody wins. The Elite Camp got what they wanted. Punk at the end of the day probably got what he wanted out of it. And hey, he got to wrestle Joe in his last AEW match. His longtime friend. So for everything this match represented in the scope of AEW's clusterfucky operation, thumbs up. An absolute memorable classic for both the right and wrong reasons. But now I'll try to get off my soapbox for a minute here. Try to be serious now. I'm going to have to be if I'm going to talk about bloodline business. Number 7 on the list. I have Roman Reigns and Solo Sikoa versus Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens from the Night of Champions in Saudi Arabia. And I think when it comes to anything pertaining to the whole bloodline timeline, it's important to draw the connections of how we get to specific points in the timeline, just because of how much layering has gone into this still technically unfinished story. Going on whatever it is, 3 or 4 years now. Now, you'll have to pardon me if I'm leaving out any details here, because it's been a while since I've gone back and seen everything again here. Based on some of the direction they've taken the story arc in the last several months, some of the angle stuff that happened in this match still left me a little bit flummoxed. You'll probably recall me talking about some of the obvious deviation they've done in the bloodline story throughout the year. Booking some oddball swerves that really didn't go hand in hand with the various angles they were teasing. In the lead up to this finish, keep in mind, this was the undisputed tag title match back when Sami and KO were still technically the champions. And at this point, they still had Jey Uso on SmackDown. They were getting ready to gear him up for that big singles match with Roman at SummerSlam a couple months later. Because this was, I think it was May or June, correct? Yeah, they had this match. They had the Money in the Bank match a month or so later where Jey actually got the win over Roman. And then that set up the title match at SummerSlam. At this point, they were still in the teasing process. They were doing the whole dissension with Jey and Roman, but they hadn't actually pulled the trigger on it yet. Yeah, Roman had been berating Jey on TV, saying he was going to fall back in line and follow orders, just like he did when Roman was beating him up as a kid. And everybody was sort of subconsciously waiting for the moment where Jey would kind of pull himself up by the jockstrap and start fighting back on Roman. By this period, they had already broken Sami away from the group. He was back to being a full-fledged babyface at this point. And when they were doing the build-up to this, I think if I remember correctly, Roman had handpicked Solo to be his tag partner instead of Jimmy and Jey getting the title shot. And I think that's what set them both over the edge. The fact that Roman was still pissed at them for losing the titles to KO and Sami at WrestleMania. So he basically bypassed them and said, well, you're not trustworthy enough, so it's going to be me and Solo that bring home the gold. So you had that long stretch here where Jimmy and Jay were out of the picture entirely. And then right at the end when Roman bumped the referee, that led to the spot where the Usos hit the ring and started jumping Sami and Owens. They do the big dramatic sequence where Solo gets to restrain Sami so the Usos can super kick him. But Sami ducks it and Solo eats the brunt of the kick. And they have Roman get confrontational with both the brothers. And if I remember correctly, I think it was actually Jimmy that fired up and kicked Roman in the face. And if you remember, that led to the whole slew of TV follow-up where Roman and Solo basically kicked the shit out of Jimmy while Jay was tied to the ring ropes, and they made him watch. They did the whole ambulance angle. Then, of course, it led to the SummerSlam payoff where Jimmy came back and screwed Jay out of the belt and just went back to siding with Roman like nothing ever happened. And that was where they kind of lost me in the whole bloodline plot. A bridge too far. They got way too cute with the booking and just forewent any logic and coherency just to swerve the people. But up to this point, the dots were connecting. And I love the way they pieced this all together at the time. Yes, it was a very long match, but they had the people invested. They were in Saudi Arabia too, so Sami had the support of all the Syrian fans in attendance. There were so many layers to it, though, and I think they made it work. It wasn't going to be everybody's cup of tea just because of all the incessant milking and the crowd manipulation going on. To be fair, it took a while for things to really get going. But for a guy like me that was really hanging on to every bloodline detail up until the whole Jimmy swerve at SummerSlam, I was fully invested. It was a great title match here in front of a hot crowd. The angles they implemented into the match got over. The crowd psychology was on point. Just everything about this worked. It had so many standout moments that you always kind of look for in these high-profile main event matches. While maybe not the most visually impressive athletic contest, that's not what the bloodline matches were supposed to be. It's all about storytelling. It's about the character evolution along the way, how things move from show to show in logical pathways. And until they kind of lost the plot with the whole Jimmy Uso stuff over the summer, they were still hitting on point here. And now the goal is to try to revitalize the bloodline interest as we approach Rumble and Mania season, and they start reinserting Cody back into the mix again. Speaking of Cody, let's stay on the topic of him in Night of Champions for a minute. I actually forgot that I had 2 Night of Champions matches on this Match of the Year list. Higher up in the pecking order, too. And again, much like I just talked about with the Bloodline Sami and KO stuff, this was all about story manipulation. Everything surrounding the Brock Cody trilogy and what led up to this match, being their second match in the series. And I don't want to spoil too much because I'm not done revisiting the whole Brock Cody feud. Out of their 3 matches, I actually was of the opinion that the first one was probably the weakest. Whichever show that was. Was it the Backlash show after WrestleMania? Might have been from the previous month. For whatever reason, that one just really didn't stand out like the other 2 in the series did. But what that match did successfully is catapult the feud into the second gear, which helped the ongoing story for one. They shot the angle on Raw after Cody won the first match. Brock attacked Cody in the back, injured the arm, and it forced Cody to go into the match here with a cast on his forearm, basically rendering him half mobile. So with Brock already having the built-in advantage, they worked it like a total Mid-Atlantic territory match, straight out of the Dusty playbook. Cody was the babyface in peril, fighting from underneath the whole time. Brock just beat Cody from pillar to post for the majority of it. And they gave Cody those momentary glimpses of offense at the very end. But once Brock locked in the Kimura and had Cody stationary on the mat, that was basically it. Cody never quit, but the rest stoppage gave Brock the win to tie the series at 1 apiece. It was done so well because they protected Cody in one aspect, but even when the match was over, you could see Brock sell it facially like, yeah, I know it was a fluke win, but now that I made Cody vulnerable, I can use that to my advantage whenever we meet again. Again, total old school match. There was nothing flashy about anything that happened. It was all pure emotion that carried the match. And just like the previous one we talked about, you had every single one of those Saudi fans backing Cody the whole time. The perfect babyface heel dynamic. And again, that was only match 2 in the series. Because now we can move on to number 5 on the list. And we can talk about the third match in the Cody Brock series. In my humble opinion, the best one. Cody and Brock from SummerSlam. God, what a great match this was. And such a huge turnaround from the first match they had at Backlash. I guess when it comes to a lot of these matches on the list, you can pretty much tell that I'm a stickler for drama and storytelling. Sorry. I've always been wired that way as a wrestling fan. It'll always remain that way no matter what. Doesn't matter how many Meltzer marks out there try to convince me otherwise. It's all about the work rate. Fuck you. No, it's not. In the case of Cody and Brock, the only thing you needed was Brock Lesnar going into beast mode for the entirety of it. Throwing Cody around like a pinball. And every single time Brock would yell for Cody to stay down, he would just keep getting progressively more angry with each passing refusal. One of those memorable spots in the whole match was the floor angle where Brock kept kicking Cody out of the ring, yelling for him to stay out, take the count-out loss. And every single time Cody refused to stay down, Brock would just keep upping the level of punishment. In a lot of ways, it was the prototypical bully heel versus scrappy underdog babyface tale. But whereas we've seen that story plenty of times throughout wrestling history, Cody and Brock's performance is what sold it. And let me just say this too, because I think this is a testament to Cody more than anything. If you follow my channel for years now, you probably would know that I've been pretty lukewarm on Brock Lesnar's WWE run for a very long time. I really haven't been all that invested in Brock's programs for years now. For whatever reason, though, there was something about his work with Cody in this feud that just gave me a new appreciation, not just for Brock, but for Cody's ability to stir up that intrigue again. To me, I think when Brock is booked in more of a subordinate role, he's not chasing the title, he's not being pushed as the tippy-top guy, but he's kind of filling the void as a special attraction upper mid-carder. He's a lot more tolerable in that role. I can at least recognize he's a big star without them having to shove it down my throat by always slotting him into the world title matches. We've seen it, been there, done that. It's kind of old news now. I don't really think he needs that rub anymore. This is the kind of perfect role for Brock. He's a great dance partner for Cody. It was something to keep Cody occupied throughout the year while he wasn't pursuing the bloodline business. Kind of got the people's minds off the fact that he didn't beat Roman for the title at WrestleMania. You could tell Brock was extra motivated to work with him, so that helps. All around, this feud absolutely slapped. I wasn't the biggest fan of the whole handshake, hug thing afterwards, but at least it was Brock's way of acknowledging, hey, this guy's got balls. He stood toe-to-toe with me. He took an ass beating, but he fought me like a man. He still beat me fair and square. And I have to own up to that. It's not really in Brock's wheelhouse to do the whole embrace thing, but I get why he would want to give Cody that endorsement. If it's all part of their plan to prepare Cody for the big win over Roman, it counts. Oh, AEW. What happened? You had such potential. No. More broadly speaking, MJF's world title reign had such potential before they went ahead and fucked it all up. It's a bittersweet match to go back and talk about. But coming in at number 4 on my list here, a match that I think most people universally agreed was one of the best Iron Man matches in wrestling. Although I find that somewhat debatable. MJF versus Bryan Danielson. AEW World Championship. 60-minute Iron Man match. Or marathon match, depending on how old school you are. And it was from the Revolution pay-per-view back in, was it February this year? March? I think it was February. And, I mean, God. Where does one even start here? This isn't really the place where I would want to give a play-by-play synopsis of everything that happened just because there's so much detail to it. And at the same time, I don't want to turn this conversation into a negative because of everything that transpired after the fact. The simple fact that I don't think any of MJF's title matches have come remotely close to touching this one. Just in terms of an overall package, the psychology, the storytelling, the brutality, the fighting spirit. Like, everything that I've ever said about the kind of wrestling I enjoy, this whole thing encapsulated it in more ways than one. And again, it's such a bittersweet match to go back and review because this was right around the point where MJF was still white hot. For the most part, everything he was involved with on the show was taken seriously. There were no goofy comedy skits with Adam Cole or him doing silly, out-of-character things that the MJF personality would never be involved with. He was still a heel at this point, so watching it in real time again, it actually felt like I was reliving the old MJF style that always resonated with me the most. We could talk about Bryan Danielson until the cows come home. As frustrating as it's been, seeing the ups and downs of his AEW run, the injuries, the concussions, the whole laundry list of things that have held him down, the fucking stuff with the BCC that never got over with me. Danielson always just seemed like an outcast in that group. There were small booking quirks along the way that always prevented me from always enjoying Danielson's work on AEW television. But it's really kind of telling in a lot of ways. Like, if you go back and ask yourself, what are the truly best matches in AEW history? The ones that you would voluntarily go back and rewatch in a heartbeat. Think off the top of my head, this is the real genius of Bryan Danielson. He really has had a lot of the best matches in company history. He had great matches with Kenny Omega. He gave Adam Page the best match of his career. And I'm not a fan of either of those guys. He's done great work with MJF. I remember when he first signed with AEW a couple years ago, he went on a slew of multiple matches where he was just tearing the house down month after month after month. Didn't he have a fantastic pay-per-view match with Eddie Kingston at one point? The ring work of Danielson from that late 2021 to early 2022 period, that was probably some of the best Danielson work I've ever seen. And again, the thing that sucks is that he's been plagued by injury after injury after injury. His body is broken down in so many ways to the point where he just hasn't been able to stay healthy for a consistent amount of time. Makes it frustrating when you reflect back and think, God, this Iron Man match with MJF was so great. Makes you think what they could have done by trying to actually build a program around it. Instead of doing a one and done on to the next thing for MJF after the fact. And then Danielson getting saddled with the oil mechanic and all the blood and gore shit afterwards. Danielson went from a main eventer to a bit player in a goofy mid-card faction almost instantly. And I don't care what people fucking say. The BCC sucked from day one. And Danielson being associated with it lowered his value as an on-screen personality immediately. Bite me if you don't like me saying it. This Iron Man match with MJF was the Danielson that I always admired as a fan. The workhorse that could go the hour Broadway, piece together a technical masterclass with a top heel that people took seriously. No bullshit, no comedy, no hokey angles that completely take you out of the match. And, I can't remember who was talking about this, but someone who reviewed this match talked about the fact that even though it was long, it was never boring. There were never any down periods where you were kind of waiting for the next big thing to happen. They worked it brilliantly by starting basic, keeping everything mostly grounded. And then as the match heats up, you start adding the bigger spots and the bigger angles. You add the drama, you add the blood. Not starting at 100% and then teetering off midway through because there was nowhere to go. Taking their time and milking the important moments, not reaching the peak too soon. They never got ridiculous with the falls either. I can't remember what the final tally was. I remember MJF retained, obviously, but what was it, like a 4-3 tallied or something? 4 wins for Max, 3 for Danielson, something in that vein. That is feasibly credible in a match like that. They weren't spamming fall after fall after fall to where the point where you're like, okay, this is going to be a bit much. Of course, they do the draw where after the 60-minute period, both guys were tied at 3 falls apiece. So they do the whole sudden death thing. And they had the people hanging on to every last moment in that overtime sequence. Like, people actually bought the idea that Danielson could win the belt here. And then they do the whole oxygen tank spot where MJF hits Danielson with a gimmick, ends up tapping him out with a label lock, using Danielson's own finish against him. It's pro wrestling, dude. Done the right way. I think in hindsight, the only criticism I ever had about the idea of them booking the Iron Man stipulation was, why did the match call for it? To my recollection, it was the first one in the series. I don't think they ever really did a great job setting up the rationale for why it had to be an Iron Man match. Other than Tony's a Mark Booker and thought it would be a good idea. That's really my only qualm about the whole setup for it. The terrible explanation for why it needed to be a marathon match. But remove that. This is what I was hoping MJF's title reign was going to be. Over a long-term basis. And up until the summer where they started getting too cute with the whole Adam Cole stuff, MJF was the only real serious worker on the whole television show from week to week. Well, him and Punk, but Punk was out for most of the first half of the year because of the injury. But I was enjoying MJF's title reign up through the Danielson program because I really thought they could get more mileage out of it than they ended up doing. And instead, they went right from this to the Adam Cole shit. And I'm sorry I keep reverting back to it again, but that's exactly what it was. Shit. It was shit from day one. And I still maintain my opinion that it was shit. It made MJF totally unwatchable. It made Adam Cole look even goofier with all the overacting he was doing at the time. And it was everything I hate about sports entertainment presentation in wrestling. And that's what they made MJF. They made him a sports entertainer. And now I sit here in December of 2023, going into 2024. I still have no rhyme or reason to give a fuck about anything MJF's involved with. He's still a babyface from what I can see. I mean, he's feuding with like half the goddamn roster right now. You can't even figure out how they're connecting the dots with any of these moving parts. You're like, why is he feuding with guys A, B, C, and D while teasing shit with guys E, F, and G when he hasn't wrapped up his beef with guy H yet? It's too much. It's overexposure. It's Tony Khan realizing that MJF is the only star he has on his program at this point. The only guy that the people still value as an actual talent. So now he's plastering the guy all over the TV show to give the product any sense of integrity. But none of it is making you want to see MJF more. Now you want to see him less. Because there's too much of him. You know, it's pretty much the opposite of what they were doing with MJF for the first 3 years of the company. Where when you did see him on television, it actually felt like a big deal. Now you see him on the show and you're just grown. You're like, all right, we get it. MJF's a star. Can you try elevating some other people? So I just rambled on for about 5 minutes there. The point to all this is, I love this match. I love the work these guys did together. It's a damn shame Tony dropped the ball with it after the fact. There was so much more money to be made with this feud. And he just let it slip. Like Tony Khan always does. He takes good ideas, good surface level storylines, and he just lets it slip through the cracks. Because he has no idea what he's doing. Speaking of guys Tony's dropped the ball on, well, I guess that would account for most of the roster, wouldn't it? Well, certainly you would have to throw FTR at the top of that discussion panel. And the numerous ways Tony's butchered the FTR run in AEW. God, where do you start with that? But as I wind down this list of the final 3 matches, I couldn't get away with not including this one. This FTR versus Jay Juice collision match from July 8th. It actually kind of brought me back to thinking about those FTR Briscoes matches from the year prior. In the AEW Rivalry of the Year, that was never actually counted as an AEW rivalry since all that business happened on Ring of Honor Purgatory. At least when it comes to the FTR versus Jay and Juice feud, this all at least happened in front of larger packed crowds. So you really understood and appreciated the business they did together, since it could take place on a bigger scale. But man, I don't see how you make a top list of matches for 2023 and not include this one on there. I've talked about it on the channel so much, I'm almost beating a dead horse at this point. But I'm a huge tag team wrestling proponent. I'm a Midnight Express mark through and through. Nothing will ever change that. And when I see tag team wrestling done the right way, on a professional level, with real tag teams that understand the psychology, I'll tell you, it's just as valuable today as it was, say, 30 or 40 years ago. And I guess for that younger fan base out there that didn't really grow up appreciating real great tag team wrestling, it's harder for them to conceptualize. But when you see modern tag teams that exist like FTR, teams that grew up idolizing Tully and Arn, the Midnights, the Rock and Rolls, all those classic duos, it's when you realize these guys get it. They get tag team wrestling. There's still hope. It's hard to teach that stuff. Especially with this newer generation of people coming up in the business. The ones that think the Young Bucks form of tag team wrestling is real tag team wrestling. But what a great match this was. One of two great matches they had together, as a matter of fact. Stay posted. But this was the first match they had in their series. And again, man, it happened on Collision. Going back to that conversation earlier when we were running down those 6-mans and 8-mans. Funny enough, these guys were part of that discussion too, because they were involved. This was the concept of what Collision was supposed to be. Real professional sports-based wrestling. Whatever definition you want to use when it comes to sports-based anything. We can bicker and banter about that amongst ourselves, but the match had everything. It had heat. It had drama. Clear-cut baby faces and heels. You had a simple premise. Jay and Juice are fighting to try to earn a title shot with FTR. If they beat them, they get a title match. So they use every heel trick in the book to try to cheat and weasel their way into getting a title match. God, Jay and Juice, man. Those guys are such a great duo together. They're total polar opposite personalities, but you watch the way they work off each other in the ring. The cohesiveness of everything they do together. You pair that with Cash and Dax, who we all know are a brilliant team themselves. It's one of those things where you think back and you see the kind of work these guys do together versus, say, what you would get out of an elite tag team match, whether it's tags or multi-mans. It's just constant in and out bullshit. There's no cohesion or rationality to anything that happens. It's all just moves, stunt. You don't ever remember a single fucking thing that happens the minute the match is over. It's so frustrating to see that people get so brainwashed to think that's the kind of tag team wrestling that's good. The whole video game psychology. And then you see something like this. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff that happens during it. But it's all rooted in logic. There's actual tagging going on. The heels are cheating. They're looking for every underhanded tactic in the book so they can get the advantage. They're milking big moments, building up the hot tags. For the most part, there's no random floor brawling. No one's using gimmicks or furniture. It's a match that would totally fit in with any territory, going back to the 60s, 70s, 80s, even the early 90s. And at the end of the day, that's all I want as a wrestling fan, man. I want to watch simple, basic wrestling that doesn't insult my intelligence. I want to watch good, competent workers that understand the business and know how to capture my attention. It's not that hard. Christ, FTR have been doing it for years. Ever since their stellar work in NXT. I've been a fan of Jay White in the past. Juice Robinson, after he finally left WWE and sort of found his own in New Japan, that guy ended up becoming a hell of a talent. Now, of course, I haven't followed much of what these guys have been doing since I stopped watching AEW, but you can only hope that they would decide to revisit this program again at some point in the future, because these guys had great chemistry. And the great thing about this particular match, because Jay and Juice won, by cheating, obviously, they got a title match with FTR. And again, stay posted. Now we come down to the wire. And this one here, I almost did it. I was like a split hair away. I almost made it number one. And I think the only thing preventing it from making number one on the list was the fact that I still had a soft spot for the match that I actually slated in that number one spot. But man, oh man, you want to talk about a close runner-up. If I could comprise a list of top 15 matches and make a hypothetical number 1.5, Sami Zayn versus Roman Reigns, Universal Championship from Elimination Chamber, be the perfect fit. What a roller coaster ride, dude. Watching everything in this story unfold from beginning to end. It's truly unique in wrestling these days that you get those real authentic moments where everyone's emotionally invested from start to finish. You know, the idea that you can predict the finish going either way, and it would still make complete sense. Even if people deep down really kind of knew that Sami was never beating Roman to win the belt, goddamn, you still held out hope, right? You know, that sliver of doubt they planted in the build-up on the television shows where Cody did that confrontation with Sami, and he gave him that brief kick in the ass when Sami was doubting himself, telling him, I'm going to finish my story, and now it's time to finish yours. But I don't want to see you on Raw. I don't want to see you on SmackDown. I want to see you at WrestleMania as the Universal Champion. And it lit a fire under Sami. What a promo. What a moment. And then, of course, you get the actual match, which rode the entire wave of emotional outpour. You know, this is the type of match where you couldn't do it in any other place but Montreal. It had to be in Montreal. There wasn't a single man, woman, or child in that crowd that was not solely behind Sami. They wanted so desperately for him to win the title. You know, I think I even said it at the time, this had Louisiana Superdome in the mid-'80s vibe going on. Every single thing Sami did here, people creamed themselves, dude. And anything Roman did, whether it was a move, blowing snot, fucking breathing, looking at the people the wrong way, showered with booze. Just the mere presence of Roman in the ring with Sami here, that was enough to get him heat. The most amazing part of it was the first 5 minutes. If anything, if you're going to go back and wonder to yourself, well, what should I watch in the match? Just watch the first 5 minutes. Nothing else needs to be said. They didn't touch until several minutes after the opening bell. That's how much electricity was in the room. These people were so into Sami. All Roman and Sami had to do was stand there and absorb the reaction. The exact kind of thing where you realize it's not about the fucking moves, dude. No matter how much these marks try to persuade you to believe so. No. It's about the larger-than-life personalities that know how to command attention in the room. And Roman and Sami standing around doing nothing for 5 minutes, that got more of a reaction than virtually anything we've seen from a physical standpoint in wrestling all year. MJF and Danielson, God bless them, they went 60 minutes in an Iron Man match. Probably got the same level of reaction this got. But those guys had to practically kill themselves to do it. Sami and Roman didn't even need to lock up. That's the kind of reaction that you look for. That's fucking pro wrestling, dude. I don't give a shit what anybody says. Roman was a great scumbag, just beating and wailing on Sami while his wife is watching at ringside. Like, she was fantastic with her selling during this. You know, the announcers are passionately rooting for Sami, like, not even trying to be objective commentators, which I guess has its flaws. But at least it made sense here, you know? He's the hometown guy. You can't help but like him. I mean, really, the only person rooting for Roman in this case was the Bloodline and or Satan. You know, all the drama with the near falls, you know, the big impactful moments where you see the facials on both guys. You know, at various points when Roman's on the verge of losing, Paul Heyman's looking on with panic face. I love the dynamics of Jay's involvement here. We all know his relationship with Sammy and how those guys hit it off. Yeah, it all started with those Uzi chants on SmackDown. And then those guys became the best of friends. And what a TV moment that was. People still talk about that to this day. When Sammy got the entire bloodline to break kayfabe. But they had the great angle at the end here where Roman gives Jay the chair. And he tells him to finish the job by hitting Sammy. And Jay won't do it. You know, and then, of course, they have Sammy accidentally spear Jay when he tries to charge at Roman. And from that point, it was pretty academic. Like, you could hear the audible groan in the crowd from the people once they realized that Sammy was kind of fucked. And I remember all the controversy surrounding the finish where, you know, people kept saying, Sammy should have won. Sammy should have beat Roman. It was the right time, right place. And that's also kind of where I learned to never take objective journalists seriously in wrestling. It's like, I mean, I get the argument, but you couldn't have Sammy win the title here. It didn't fit the Mania story of where they were going with Roman and Cody. Yeah, it's nice to think hypothetically they could have given everybody the feel-good moment, have Sammy upset Roman, defy the odds, pull the upset of a lifetime in his hometown. But it wouldn't have been the right thing to do. You know, and even with Sammy not beating Roman here, it didn't make Sammy any less over after the fact. He was still a hot personality on television. The people still loved him. And he got his Mania moment. He won the tag straps with KO at WrestleMania. He main evented night one. You know, even if the actual title reign was uneventful and poorly handled. But man, what an awesome title match. Right at the peak of when the Bloodline was at its hottest. And every single week on SmackDown, the Bloodline was the story material you were looking forward to. The promos, the angles, the interactions, the story evolution. It all led to this moment. It was so well done. And it really kind of made you want to see Sammy and Roman go at it again at some point down the road. You know, that option is not entirely off the table. You know, even if Cody and Roman is the game plan for WrestleMania next year, you know, it doesn't mean they can't ever explore a second Roman-Sammy match. You know, that bad blood is always going to exist. As long as Roman's a heel. You know, this match definitely seems like it was a lifetime ago, but it still remains one of the hottest moments in wrestling this year. An absolute highlight. And yet, as amazing as that was, I still have one more match on the list. And I struggled greatly with the placement of it just because of how much I love this Roman-Sammy title match. But as brilliant as it was, I still look back to this match, and I just can't place it behind anything else on the list. So I will bear you the suspense. Coming in at number one, I have FTR versus Jay White and Juice Robinson for the AEW World Tag Titles, 2 out of 3 falls, AEW Collision from July 15th. Now, the week after the non-title match on Collision, which, as we just talked about a few minutes ago, was also really fucking great. I didn't think they could do it. I did not think there was any way they could top that non-title match the week prior. But I guess these guys heard that message and said, hold my beer, brother. And beyond the fact that it was tremendous, step above that non-title match the week prior, the other thing to keep in mind here too, whereas I think the previous match from the July 8th show was what? Some like 30, 35 minutes? It was a long match. No, this one went almost the entire length of the first hour. In fact, it may have bled into hour 2 slightly. So not only was it longer, not only was it more gruesome, but they also exceeded the ring work of the one fall match the week prior. And because the first match tore the house down, there was that built-in pressure or level of expectation that, hey, they're doing this rematch a week later. There's a lot on the table right now. What if it doesn't live up to the hype of the previous match? And that, I think, is the real testament to proving just how great these guys actually were. They didn't let the pressure get to them. And they worked this match entirely differently from the first match. But they also still included wrinkles of story elements that tied in from match number 1, like scouting finishers, countering similar moves that were done in the first match, paying attention to the subtle nuances that helped tie things over from the previous sequences. The idea they planted early on where after FTR were down one fall, now Cash and Dax have to gut it out and work extra hard to pick up another win, just to tie it. And they did such a phenomenal job of waiting to actually do the second fall. Like, it wasn't a slip on a banana peel finish where, the heels get a win and then the babyfaces tie it right back up a minute or two later. They waited. They had the heels reverse and kick out of a lot of FTR's offense to the point where they even had FTR doubting themselves, wondering how in the hell they were supposed to beat these guys and make a comeback. And then finally, when they hit that big rig on Juicy Fruit and they tied it up 1-1, that pop was electric. Now they're on an even playing field again. And the crowd is super into everything because now they realize FTR have a fighting chance again. And eventually you get to the great climax where they're trading stuff back and forth. It's a seesaw effect where you don't really know who has the advantage. They do the double sharpshooter spot where the heels are in trouble, but FTR can't hold the grip long enough before they both collapse. So then Dax has to lower the knee pad to give himself some extra leverage. That way when he cinches in the sharpshooter on Juice, he can actually get the tap out win. So many great homages to previous eras of tag team wrestling here. I mean, you can't really include them all in one brief synopsis. But it's like I said with the first match. This is the kind of wrestling that I look for as a fan. The kind of wrestling that I understand it's few and far between. But when you see it, you're reminded, hey, there's still hope in this sport. It takes the right set of guys and the right environment to do it. But it is possible. There are still workers that take this business seriously and just wish it wasn't a rarity anymore. Can you imagine what it would be like if everybody just got out of this fucking indie mindset, started valuing material like this? Everyone would be better off for it. The business would be better off for it. At the time, I think I said this was one of the best modern tag team matches I'd seen. Still think it holds up. I had not seen anything this good since the series of Briscoe's FTR matches the year prior. But those were all on pay-per-view. In terms of like an actual TV match, yeah, this is probably one of the better ones. Of course, if you want to go back even farther than the Briscoe's FTR stuff, you maybe go back to FTR and American Alpha from NXT. And what was that, like a decade prior to that? And it's the kind of thing where you can show this to a random casual person that doesn't really follow or watch wrestling on a mainstream basis. They would probably still enjoy it because it was competitive. It looked serious. It looked like an athletic contest. Nobody was doing backflips or cartwheels or somersault planches through shards of ass glass. None of that. It was 4 grown adult men having a professional, serious fight. trying to establish who the better team is. You know, for all the talk on AEW wanting to be sports-based wrestling, trying to mold themselves after that business model, you know, it'd be nice to see if they actually lived up to that ideal after 4 fucking years of lying to us about it. If this is what AEW means by sports-based wrestling, then hey, they should aim to do more shit like this. You know, instead of following in the pattern of what we see from the elite schmucks, the ones with a bad mind for the business that don't understand the first thing about wrestling, nor do they want to. Maybe one day, maybe Tony will finally wake up and figure it out. But by that point, I think AEW will be way too irrelevant for that conversation to even matter. So there's my list. My selection of top 15 best matches in 2023. Now, I did my best to try to fairly split it up between the two companies, WWE and AEW. In 2024, I do not foresee that being a 50-50 list. You know, unless there's a handful of AEW matches that are actually worth going out of my way to check out, then maybe. But there you have it. And let me know what you think. You know, let me know if you have any grievances or suggestions. If there are matches that I left off this list that you think are in the running for a conversation, hey, let me know. Yeah, but I think most people would agree with at least a good chunk of these matches making the list. Well, we'll see what 2024 has to offer in wrestling. There were some good matches this year. I can't totally crap on wrestling in the year 2023. It was a struggle to come up with this list, to be honest with you, but the ones that I did note here, I was pretty set on them from the very beginning. So, there you have it. Now, I think I've done enough damage here. So again, just to bring this all to closure, I hope everybody enjoyed the show this week. And I guess by the time we come back, well, no, I'll still have at least one more show before the end of the year, but we are moving vastly into a new year, not just for modern wrestling, but for classic wrestling as well. So I'm looking forward to that. And we will get back to the regular format of the Monday and Friday shows going forward. So I appreciate people that stuck through that and gave me a week off so I can recuperate and sleep and not dedicate my life to the wrestling business. Not that I do already, but yeah, good stuff. All right, everybody. So I'm going to peace out. Again, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, whatever you celebrate around this time of year. If you're doing any traveling, I always say it, be careful. There's a lot of weirdos out there. But I will catch you guys on Friday for the continuation of our Retro Friday podcast with NWA Crockett, Mid-South Wrestling, and World Class. And until then, take care. Peace out.